Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 ELO in chess.com rapid games, and during the games I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. Today we have a Vienna, and we will see what my opponent plays. He goes knight to c6. I actually recently, like 2 days ago, uploaded like a hour, 20-minute video covering everything in the Vienna, so if you want to see that, then check it out on my channel page. But I will be explaining what we're going to be doing in this particular line. So this is known as the Max Lange Defense. Now after knight to f6, you can play the Vienna Gambit with f4. Here, f4 isn't really a move, just because, like, with the knight on f6, after f4, black can't really take because of the move e5, attacking the knight. Here, of course, we don't have that, so it would just be more of a typical King's Gambit position, which is not what we're going for. The way that you kind of play against the Max Lange defense is to go bishop to c4. I mean, there's lots of different things you can do, but if you're going to play it in true Vienna style, then bishop c4 is what you want to play. And the point is that we're applying pressure to the f7 pawn. We're preparing to play d3 to secure our center and control the d5 square very, very nicely with 3 of our pieces. And then we're going to play f4 sometime in the future, once we've played d3 so that the bishop supports the f4 push. And then ideally, we're going to put the knight behind the f-pawn. My opponent goes knight to f6. Now, again, the move f4 doesn't work because after takes e5, my opponent can just take the pawn. So we go d3, open up our dark-squared bishop, and prepare the move d4. Now, I think the critical line here for black to play is the move knight to a5, and there's no way for us to save our light-squared bishop. So the computer will always recommend in those lines to allow black to take and then play like a queen f3, knight g to e2 setup. Personally, I recommend after knight a5 dropping the bishop back to b3, allowing the doubling of the pawns by taking with the a pawn, opening up your rook, and still playing for this f4, knight f3 plan. But my opponent goes bishop e7, we're going to play f4. Bishop e7 is fine, but you could argue it's a little bit passive. The bishop can come to the c5 square, and that's also a critical line. But here, we kind of get everything we want. We have really good control over the d5 square, so black can't play d5 himself. He has to settle for d6. And we apply pressure to the e5 pawn. Of course, if my opponent takes, we take back with the bishop, and in a lot of those lines, we can actually play the move d4, and take the full center off of black. We're going to castle, and my opponent goes bishop g4. Now, you can play f5 in this position sometimes, but personally I like to get castled first. So bishop g4, and I do like the move king h1 in this position, because I have a lot of success with, after knight to d4, trying to get my opponent to take on f3, and after g takes, bishop h3, rook g1, we can start a nice attack on the king side. However, the critical move in this position is the move h3. And black has to take, because if black retreats, then he just gets his bishop trapped, and after knight to d4, which you might be concerned about, we have the f2 square for the queen. The queen doesn't have to go all the way back to d1. We can maintain pressure on the f-file, we can defend c2, we can prepare to get rid of this knight, we still control the d5 square very well, and there is no knight to g4 harassing our queen because, of course, the h-pawn controls this square. And this is kind of an ideal Vienna game sort of setup. If you are enjoying the video so far and finding this useful, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps to motivate me to keep making these videos for you guys. And okay, this is an interesting position. It's an interesting position because the question is, what are we going to do next? We've kind of got everything we want, but what's the follow-up? a4 looks very logical, stopping black from expanding on the queen side, and a4, queen b6. I think we can probably play a5 there. The queen probably doesn't belong on b6 anyway. The queen tends to belong in the center of the board because we could switch the focus up to the king side very, very quickly. We can also consider the move bishop to e3, trying to attack this knight because the knight is very annoying, applying pressure to c2. That's also something that we can do. We could again play the move f5 and divert our attention to the king side at a good moment. One of the key things to note in this position is that we have the only light squared bishop. My opponent doesn't have a light squared bishop, so it's very difficult for him to oppose me on the light squares. And of course, f7, it's well defended for now, but it could become a problem in the future. Taking on e5 would be a very bad move. It just helps black out. That's exactly what he wants. I think we need to try and get rid of this knight. I'd love to play knight to e2, but then we hang the c2 pawn because we disconnect our queen. So bishop e3 looks tempting, but I don't really want to give away my dark squared bishop, because after f5 I have bishop to h6 ideas, for example, which I really would like to play. I also don't want to move this knight, really, because the knight and the bishop and the pawn are stopping a d5 advance, which I want to keep on lock as much as possible. So a4 is the move I'm going to play, which is a little bit of a waiting move in all reality. I'm not exactly sure quite what I want to do yet, and I want to see what my opponent does with this position. Is he going to continue his queenside expansion? Is he, I don't know, going to try and reroute this knight to b6 or put his bishop on f6? Maybe rook e8, bishop f8 is what he wants to do. I think part of the reason I really like this kind of setup for the white pieces is because whilst we've got a very nice position, even if it isn't 100% clear exactly what we should be going for, I mean, I think it's obvious we need to try and get rid of this knight while ensuring d5 still cannot be played. Again, you could argue you could take on e5, and after d takes e5, then you could move this knight and get rid of this knight, and of course there is no d5 anymore because the d6 pawn would have been traded off. But this d6 pawn is a weak pawn, and as long as we can navigate this middle game correctly, if we don't end up checkmating our opponent, which is very likely, I mean, we have a lot of pressure building up in this position. If we don't end up checkmating our opponent, as long as we can keep this pawn glued to the d6 square, it's going to be a big weakness in any endgame. Any endgame is going to be a weakness. So that is something I want to keep on the board. My opponent, if he takes on f4, of course that only helps us. We'd love for him to take on f4. Then we take back with the bishop. And again, this d-pawn still sucks. It's just a target for us. Our bishop can come to a square like g5 or h6 in the future. And again, we kind of get everything that we want in this position. a6 could be played, stopping anything from coming to b5, maybe preparing the move b5 himself. But, I mean, we've got this square b5 very much on lock. Same with d5 and e5, really. The same pieces are doing the job of controlling those squares, and we're dominating the light squares. And the fact that our opponent has traded off his light squared bishop earlier on in the game makes it even more difficult for him to contest those squares. This bishop is a horrific bishop as well, because these pawns are kind of stuck on the dark squares, right? And so this bishop has a very big problem in terms of maneuverability. My opponent, maybe it would have been a better plan to go c6 and try and prepare d5 ideas. Even that probably would have been difficult, though. My opponent takes on f4. We're going to take back. Of course, don't take with the queen and blunder the c2 pawn. That would be completely unnecessary. And now I think our job is incredibly easy, because I believe we can probably just play the move rook a to c1 now that our bishop has vacated the c1 square, which our opponent has basically allowed us to do without wasting any kind of time, right? Because if, for example, we'd played bishop to e3 in this position, vacating the c1 square, then maybe he could have taken, and we would have wasted an extra move. Okay, knight e6. That's not particularly scary. I'm tempted just to go bishop to e3. Yeah, I think that's the move I'm going to go for. I don't want to take this knight and open up the f-file for my opponent. A pawn on e6 would also be useful, because that would support a d5 push, which of course we don't want to allow. The bishop on e3 is also good, because it can't be harassed by a knight on g4, because of course this h3 pawn is doing a great job. We're also stopping the knight from coming to d4, because we now control that square twice, and black would only be defending it once if he hopped the knight in. So whilst the bishop on f4 was applying good pressure to the d6 pawn, and maybe we could have dropped it back to g3 or h2 to maintain that pressure, it's very well defended, and it's not clear how we're going to add any more attackers. I mean, knight b5 would be a short-lived response because of a6. And our opponent does go knight d4, and he's essentially offering us a pawn, right? If take, 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 we just go up a pawn. And that's a very tempting offer, and I don't see a reason not to do it. I really don't see a reason not to. I was thinking maybe take, take, take d5, and maybe there's bishop c5 ideas, pinning my queen to my king, but nothing else controls the c5 square. Black would have to play another preparatory move, and in that time we could just retreat our queen. I mean, if like take, 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 rook c8, preparing d5 and bishop c5, then what if king h1, d5, knight takes, bishop c5, then we can just take on f6 with check or something, and we're completely fine. So let's take this. Let's take this. Yeah, I think this is just a free pawn. And unless black is trying to set up some obscure tactics on the c5 square, I think we're absolutely fine. And even if he does try and set up those tactics, I don't think it works. Our queen looks a little bit cramped, and this seems to be her only way out. But if we move any of these three pieces, then we gain access to more squares to get away. And I don't think we have any issues here. Now, I suppose something to be aware of is, let's say it was our move, and we played a move like knight to d5. After something like knight takes and queen takes, maybe, I mean, queen b6 or something, defending the b7 pawn, that would come with a check and would fork the b2 square. Let's just imagine it didn't. I mean, f7 would be hanging in those lines, but my point is, if the knights come off the board, then we do have an opposite coloured bishop position. And yeah, there's for the moment, there's still lots of other pieces on the board. My opponent does go rook to c8, which I think is a smart idea. But I believe just king h1 here. If knight takes, well then queen takes, pawn takes. We're up two pawns. That should be fine. We're up 2 pawns. Yeah, that should be fine. Let's go king h1. We do get an opposite color bishop position there, but being up 2 pawns, I think, is far easier to convert. Our opponent goes b6 to save the a7 pawn, but now it should be much easier for us to convert the position. I like the move bishop to b3. I like the look of that. I'm going to play it. Now my knight can move freely, and the c2 pawn is defended, the a4 pawn is defended, and nothing is going to be targeting b2 anytime soon, unless my opponent wants to like move the knight and put the bishop on b6. If he does do that, we'll probably whack our knight on d5. Knight c5 might be a decent move, but then we can always just move our bishop to like d5, get out of the way, and we would have a lot of pressure in that position. Again, at all times, f7 will be weak in those kinds of lines, so that should be very favourable to us. And if black doesn't do anything, we could just double up. a5 is an idea, but I don't really care that much about it. That's an interesting move. Trying to get into g3, also trying to play bishop to f6. I respect that. That's a good idea. Let me think. Because I'd love to play knight d5, making sure this is difficult to play. But if knight d5, my opponent has knight to g3. And he'll win the exchange. So maybe king h2 is better. I'm not sure. We could play rook f3. But then there is bishop to f6, skewering our queen and our knight. If queen d5, take. My opponent can't really take because we'll take on f2. Maybe. But I think we can probably just go queen e3. Make sure this doesn't come with a skewer and defend the g3 square both at the same time. We could also choose queen f2, applying pressure to f7. But I don't really want my queen to lead that charge. I don't think that makes sense. So I'm going to play queen e3. And if bishop f6, I probably will play the move d4. just to shut this diagonal down for the bishop and kind of like choke its scope out because I don't want it to see anything. Yeah, I mean, bishop h4 doesn't really do anything. I assume just rook f3. And we defend ourselves quite well. Yeah, let's just play this. Of course, knight g3 can't be played because of take, take, take. And two pieces are much better than a rook. Particularly these two pieces, which are very, very nicely placed. And once the knight gets into d5, black will have all kinds of problems most likely. Even knight b5 would be a decent move. And this bishop targeting f7 is going to be a constant headache. Constant headache for black to deal with. Whew, this is good. This is good. I mean, our next moves are just something like rook f1. Even g4 shouldn't be discounted, but probably not necessary. Yeah, my opponent offers a queen trade. I kind of half expected they were going to do that. And I think it makes the most sense for us to actually accept the queen trade, because I don't want my opponent to take and have to put my rook on the e3 square. My rook shouldn't be on e3. And now we're just going to double up. The queens are off the board, so checkmating chances, of course, are lower. We could have considered the move rook to f5. Oh, maybe we should have considered that. Oh no, then there's knight g3. Then there's knight g3. So I didn't actually realise that, but we got a bit lucky there. Well, we got lucky that I didn't miss something for reasons that I didn't notice, essentially. But yeah, I mean, even if that tactic was available, rook a to f1 is still a great move because these pawns are incredibly weak. The f7 square is incredibly weak. These pieces are misplaced. The only thing that black has is our weak dark squares that he could try and exploit. But something like bishop to h4, I mean, we could take on f7, but that gets a little bit messy. I think the simplest move is just king h2, making sure this square is controlled. And then we can focus on f7, and if the knight drops back, this bishop could get itself trapped or caught in a bit of trouble. And even if not, moves like knight b5 would simply fork two pawns, and they would be completely free pawns, because let's say the knight went to b5 and took on d6, a rook coming to d8 wouldn't like skewer the knight to any pawn, and if we were to take on a7, the a4 pawn is defended behind the knight, so that's not a problem. They would just be a free pawn. So I think it's pretty much inevitable with the weakness of all of these pawns that we're probably going to win something. Okay, well that just hangs a knight. Yeah, that just hangs a knight. Bishop f6 makes sense because he wants to try and win a pawn. Oh, if we take, he does have knight f6. I missed that. Oh, that was a good that was a good spot. I completely missed that. I probably should have played the move knight to d5, and if bishop takes, I have this fork on e7, winning the exchange. I just completely missed that. That was a bit poor, but I don't think it actually matters, because after knight f6, we just go g5, and then we're going to be winning the f7 pawn, so that's fine. A bit of an oversight from me, though, to be fair. And this knight doesn't even have an obvious square. I mean, if it goes back to h5, it's pretty much locked out of the game. I suppose you could argue that knight g3 threats exist, which would be a decent argument. We may have to play the move king h2 or something to stop that. But the knight goes to f7, which makes our job a bit easier. We could consider this. Oh, I think we may actually be able to consider that. I think, well, initially I was thinking rook takes made the most sense. But now I'm thinking about it, I'm pretty sure bishop takes actually makes the most sense, which seems counterintuitive. But bishop e6 is deadly. This is deadly. Because our opponent's knight is under attack. The knight can't move because the rook hangs. And if rook d8, or rook c7, rook d8 is obviously the more natural move, the game is over. And you should see the tactic that shows why the game is over. That is a very nice move, though. My opponent is finding some really good moves to hold on to this. Point is, if I take the rook, he takes my rook, of course. And then my g5 pawn hangs. I can't really defend that pawn. My point was, if rook d8, take, this is mate. And of course, if rook c7, take, rook to f8 is mate. I missed the move knight to e5. Good move, good move. I'd love to put the rook on f7, but of course I can't really do that, unfortunately. Rook f5? I mean, g6, I don't think that helps black's position particularly, because then we just go to f6, which helps us. Although, if g6 comes with a tempo, then the rook will be able to take here, but if rook f5 here, take, then we can win another pawn. We can take with the bishop or the knight, and g5 doesn't hang in those lines. We could, of course, just play a move like rook f2, and the rook would have to go to somewhere like e8, and then, I don't know, bishop to d5. We have the advantage, but it's unclear. I mean, if rook f5, there is still rook to e8, and the position is still unclear. Bishop d5 looks like the best move in those lines, and we have some good pressure, but we need to try and get access to either the 7th rank or the d6 pawn, which was proving to be a bit of a problem. Again, it doesn't make sense to trade the rooks here. That would be a bit silly. That would be a bit silly. Very nice move. Completely missed that. Where do I want to put the rook? Where do I want to put the rook? I'm going to go rook f5, because I'm hoping my opponent plays the move g6 and allows either taking with the pawn or taking with the bishop, but then we're 2 pawns up, and a lot of black's pawns are on dark squares, which of course my bishop can't target. You could argue the a4 pawn is weak, but that is on a light square, so my bishop should be able to get to it pretty easily. My opponent plays rook d8, which makes a whole lot of sense. We don't even have to move our bishop. We could play the move d4, attacking the knight, which looks pretty nice. And then we get access to f7. Yeah, I think this is fine. I'm pretty sure my opponent maybe had to go rook to e8, and my bishop couldn't go to either of these squares because the knight controls those squares. The knight gets pushed back to g6, where it's not really threatening to do a whole lot. And now the move rook f7 looks pretty tempting. We're also covering the c8 square, so the rook can't target our weak pawn. I don't see an issue with this. We're just attacking a7. Let's do it. If rook to e8 attacking our bishop, we can actually just take, because if rook takes, rook a8 check, and my opponent would have to just sack both his pieces and get mated. But even if there wasn't mate threats there, then we could always just move our bishop to either d5 or f5 to defend the pawn and make sure the bishop isn't hanging. f5 might be better because we're threatening to take the knight, although I don't think I really want to take the knight, because it is pretty much locked out of the game, at least for the time being. But if we were to be 2 pawns up in a rook endgame, then I probably would take the knight. But yeah, if rook e8, for the meantime, we just take on a7. If a move like h6, then we have bishop to f5. Or no, we actually have bishop f7 in those lines, attacking the knight and the rook. And that's a bit of an issue for black, because the rook can't go to e6 to defend the knight, because our bishop will, of course, just take it. Yeah, a5 is very weakening. I think rook b7. Let's play it. And I'm very confident in making these moves, simply because these pawns are so weak. And there's also back rank threats in basically every position. Okay. If here, I assume here. But we probably want to watch the h3 pawn. Is inducing this good or bad? I don't know. Probably bad, because then back rank ideas don't exist. So probably bishop to g4 makes the most sense. Oh, actually, yeah, that does make the most sense. Because we continue covering c8, we watch the h3 pawn, and we don't allow knight to e2. We cover both of the knight's movements like this, and our pawns stop the knight's movements here. We also cover this side of the bishop. Our king covers g2, so the knight only has the g6 square to go to. There'd even be ideas of like h4, h5, and rook to f7 trying to trap the knight. That wouldn't be unrealistic. But that's probably a bit of a longer term plan. At the end of the day, there's no way our opponent can stop the b6 pawn from falling. If d5 trying to get pawn takes, knight takes, which of course would defend b6 and attack c3, it would, I mean, I assume e5 is the best move by far in that position, just getting a protected passed pawn. And if anything, this d5 pawn is going to be a weakness and takes away a square from this knight, which it might want to go to. Also just ties down black's pieces to having to defend another pawn on another awkward square. Also shuts off the e file, shuts off the d file. My opponent goes h5, which, yeah, makes a whole lot of sense. We're going to have to take en passant. That's fine. And then I assume we take on b6. There are now no back rank mating threats, so technically this rook can move freely, but it doesn't really have access to all that many great squares. After this, if h5, just bishop f5, that should be fine. The knight can come to e2 to attack our c-pawn, but we could always play a move like rook to c6 defending if we want to. Yeah, let's win this pawn. I don't really see an issue with that. We could have played the move bishop f5, threatening rook to h7 check, but it seems very unnecessary. It's just a free pawn. The h-pawn is not very strong anyway. And we're eyeing up both these pawns. If the rook is on a6, then we'll be eyeing up all the remaining pawns in the black position, and we are 3 pawns up. Now, we do have to be a little bit careful, because my opponent has a knight, and of course, knights are very tricky. I think king h2, king g3 ideas are very nice when we can play them. h5 probably makes a lot of sense for my opponent to play if they can, because our bishop is very good on g4 at monitoring a lot of different things. Forcing it to f5, I mean, it will be useful for us in some ways, but it gives the knight access to the e2 square, which I think is probably important if black is going to try and create any kind of counterplay, because in those positions we won't be able to push c4 because d4 will hang, and some of those positions might even be drawn because our pawn structure would be so bad. Playing bishop f3 makes no sense because we don't want to hang this pawn, so bishop to f5, and our bishop is very safe on the f5 square. It's protected by a pawn, it's protecting a pawn. If d5, I think probably e5. And then there's threats of rook to h6, picking up this pawn if this knight ever moves, which would be very nice, and we'd get a protected passed pawn, which is going to be a big pain for black. Knight e2, as expected. I think rook c6 is the best move. My opponent could give a check on g3, but if he picks up this bishop, the rook endgame is very, very winning. Very winning. Rook b3 makes no sense. So let's do this. Rook c6. So we're defending our weakness. Yes, my opponent can come to g3 with check, which he does. King g2, rook g8, king f3 is fine. So I'm going to do this. My opponent can take. I would, of course, take back with the pawn. And the f-pawn is kind of weak. But the knight seems to be my opponent's last chance at trying to, like, swindle something from this game. So if he were to take my bishop, I feel like he throws any chances of a draw or a win away. An interesting move might be the move h4, just gluing the knight in place. There we may try and bring our king around to the g4 square to undermine the pawn. Yeah, maybe. And the rook will struggle to come to g8 because d6 is so weak. He does go rook g8. And of course now if we were to take here, we would lose horrifically after knight to f5, discovered check. We would lose both our bishop and our rook. So of course we have to move our king. I'm going to play king to f3. And this is the line that I just briefly checked before I played the move king to g2 as opposed to king to h2. Because yes, the g file could be problematic. But in this position, it's fine. If anything, it's a good version because our king can get to f4 to defend this pawn very easily, and our rook can remain active trying to pick up black's remaining pawns. So this is completely winning. We are up 3 pawns, but we've still got to convert the position. We've still got to convert it, of course. And we'll be almost at 1600 if we do. Yeah, I mean, this is clearly the best move. King f4, attacking the rook. There's no rook to g4 check because our pawn covers that square. So the rook will probably go to g2 and target the c2 pawn. I don't think I really care about the c2 pawn. I can't defend it anyway. You could make a case for pushing the f pawn, to be fair. I think I'm just going to take on d6, though, which seems absolutely fine. We could go for this, but I think I'd rather have connected passed pawns. Yeah, so I'm going to play the move rook c6, defend the c pawn, and start pushing the d pawn up the board. The f pawn, it's fine, but the king is very close to the f pawn, so I consider the d pawn to be a bit more of an asset in lots of these positions. Here, I like the fact that rook g6 can always come with a check if we want to get to the other side of our d pawn before pushing it. Just because if d6 gets played, our rook kind of gets cut off from the game a little bit, at least while the pawn's on d6. We're probably fine there. Like, obviously we're winning, but we want to be precise here and not give our opponent an opportunity to get back into the game. If black picks up a couple pawns, let's say he wins the a pawn and the h pawn somehow, black is very much back in the game. So we, of course, don't want to allow anything like that. And all of us have thrown away games doing something dumb like that and just allowing our opponent back into it in the endgame for absolutely no reason. Rook a4, yeah, he goes after this pawn. I think rook c4 makes a lot of sense. Let's play it. There's no need to give away this a pawn. Allow it to come with check and let this pawn run through. Let's go d6. I am allowing rook to f2 check, which maybe I shouldn't have allowed, but I don't know, if I give the check on c6 and force the king back, then we get into a bit of repetition there, which I don't really want. Let's go king e4. If we push, king moves, rook d4, king back. Oh no, the rook hangs. The rook hangs. So if here, the rook has to move. If here, yeah, that's completely winning. The rook is actually a liability. Even though it took a pawn, it's stopping the king from doing what it wants to do. Because we just go king d4, and we stop the rook from going to d5. The rook, of course, can't go to d8, so the rook can't stop the promotion. And if the king goes to e7 to stop the promotion, we just take the rook, because the king is the only thing defending it. And then, of course, the game is over from that position, and I expect my opponent to probably resign this move, or maybe the next move, because you can't stop me from promoting. The only way to stop me from promoting is to give me your rook, and then, of course, these pawns are not going anywhere. That's a good find. That is a good find, actually. If I promote, then rook to d1 skewers my king and my pawn. Sorry, my queen at that point. Good find. I think king c5. If rook here. And then that's winning, because we get a rook trade. If king back, then still rook here. Although, maybe king c6 is more accurate. Yeah, I think this is more accurate. Let me think a second. King c6, king here. If we move our rook to try and deliver some kind of check, then rook e6 dislodges our king from the defense of the pawn. So we actually have to just go rook d4. Which, okay, I mean, that's fine, that's fine. My opponent just sent me a message saying you missed the queen. Oh my god, I promoted with check. I'm a complete idiot. I'm a complete idiot. Oh, I'm just going to send him a message quickly. That's quite funny. I don't know why I just missed that. But okay, whatever. I think we just go pick up the pawns. Or push the C pawn. I might actually start with pawn A4. Yeah, I'm actually going to start with pawn A4. Just because my rook is now defending all of these pawns, which is kind of cool. And if rook E5... King D6? Oh, maybe that was a bad move. I don't know why I'm playing this endgame so badly. All I need to do is get this C pawn up the board. So if rook E5, king B6 even, and then you can't give this check because I'll win your A pawn. So then I just push the C pawn up the board. And if I get it to C7, then of course the game is over. And my rook should keep everything under control while my king and my pawn go about that job. And then my opponent's rook should probably be tied down to the 5th rank anyway, defending Kia. If my opponent plays a move like rook e7, then I'm happy to give up my d7 pawn, because if the rooks come off the board, then it's a king and 3 pawns versus a king and 2 pawns. But it doesn't matter, because my king will win the a pawn instantly, and my c pawn will just win the game. Even if I was a while away from the a pawn, let's say I had to go win the h pawn, my c pawn could just act as a decoy, and I'd go win the pawn, move the king, and promote, and my opponent would have to spend a very long time winning my c pawn, and then my a pawn, and then trying to push his a pawn. It wouldn't be quick enough. Yeah, he goes for this. And we could play this, but my opponent will just go rook to e4, and then I'll have to go back. So it makes more sense to go king b6. I think just attacking a5 and preparing to escort my c pawn down the board. Yeah, I don't know how I missed promote with check. Like, I literally could have just promoted with a check and the game would be over. My opponent is making my life a little bit easy now because I win the a pawn. And now, of course, there are 3 passed pawns, and my opponent definitely doesn't have the ability to stop all of them. The thing is, if my opponent does just leave his rook on the 5th rank and try and defend both pawns, he's going to lose anyway, because I will just throw the c pawn down the board and there'll be nothing that he can do about it. Yeah, okay, that doesn't do anything. We'll just push to make sure it's defended, bring the king to b5, keep pushing. Yeah, this is pretty much a done deal, but again, I just missed that promotion came with check, which is pretty hilarious. I'll pause the recording here, and I'll show you the rest of the game once it's done to save your time. Okay, well that was a little bit redundant because the game only went on for one more move. My opponent played rook to c7, I played king b6. The rook now actually runs out of moves. It can't go anywhere unless it takes on e2, which e7, which we obviously know is game over. So we win, even if it wasn't the cleanest of conversions. Let's get into the analysis and see where we could have gone a bit better and if we played the Vienna correctly there. So for those of you who still watch the analysis, by the way, you are the special few. Most people actually leave before the analysis, so you guys get the exclusive Chess Centurion content. e4, e5, knight c3. Of course, the Vienna Gambit occurs after knight f6 and f4. I should... Oh, no. I think my camera might lag on me. I apologize massively. If you check out my channel, if you want to learn more about the Vienna Gambit, down below in the playlist, there will be like basically every single video on my channel featuring the Vienna game, the Vienna Gambit, any Vienna position, etc. Essentially. And I do have a video that I recently did a couple of days ago, which is just a full guide to the Vienna, like a full opening guide to it. Obviously, I can't go massively in depth because it's a massive opening to cover, but I do my best. But my opponent goes knight c3. No, knight c6. I'm having a terrible day. Bishop c4, knight f6, and d3. The main line here is knight to a5. And the computer evaluates this as basically equal. It likes the knight g to e2 line, and if knight takes, pawn takes, the computer thinks... Oh, I don't know why my camera's lagging. But after, like, I don't know, bishop c5, queen d3, d6, maybe bishop e3, that essentially white is trying to create a bind on the d5 square and not allow black to push, but then you lose your best piece, and I don't know, I don't like these structures personally. In those knight a5 positions, I prefer the move bishop to b3, allow the knight to take like this, and then open up my rook. The only downside to this, because let's say black plays this in like normal Vienna fashion, like so, we kind of get everything we want, we're just missing the bishop. But black can play the immediate d5, and after like ed5, knight d5, I think queen f3, knight c3, pawn c3, you can't quite get the Vienna setup that you typically want to get. Not many people actually play this line, so don't be too concerned about it. But it's just an equal game, and you literally just play chess, right? You just play chess from this position. You've got the A file, you can put the rook on the E file, you can play d4, maybe c4, maybe bishop b2, maybe bring the bishop to e3, kind of up to you. But my opponent doesn't do it. Most people don't do it, to be honest. And they go bishop to e7, which is a very common move. We go f4, immediately striking at the center. Taking is fine, but it just helps us develop, of course, and we'll probably actually be able to play the move d4 at some point in the future, which will be very nice. My opponent castles, knight f3, d6. Yeah, so here I think I realized after I castled that f5 is playable. Castling is still good, but f5 is worth considering because it stops the bishop coming to g4 and also takes away the e6 square from the bishop. And moves like g6 are way too weakening trying to fight back against this because there's like ideas like this, for example, which black is just losing. So, d6, castles, bishop g4, and h3 is the move in these positions. I do sometimes like playing the king h1 lines, and after stuff like knight d4, like knight e2, take, bishop h3, rook g1. I have ridiculous win rates in these positions, but black doesn't have to do that. They don't have to allow you to do that. They can play moves like d5, they can take on f4, they can take with the bishop. It's not quite that simple. So it's kind of like, it's hope chess. It's hope chess, which is why I instead played h3, which I know is the best move. Bishop takes, queen takes, knight d4. We drop the black. Queen d1 is better? I must be thinking of a different line. Huh. I mean, queen f2 is still fine, but queen d1 is better. Why? So c6, yeah, is kind of the move I was expecting. But let's say my opponent played it in the same fashion with c5. Computer wants f5. Let's say a6. a4. Okay, rook b8, knight d5, take. It wants to put the knight on d5 and then play c3, I assume. Yeah, interesting. Queen f2 is fine, though. Queen f2 is fine. c5, a4. f5 was probably a bit better. I probably should have given that a bit more consideration, but a4 is okay. ef4, bishop f4, knight e6. And we drop the bishop back to e3. Computer slightly preferred bishop h2, but I don't think it matters too much. And then knight d4, of course, just allows us to win a pawn. The move rook c8 is the best move. And it was a good find from our opponent. Okay, king h1 is better than king h2. And it's a very interesting idea. Because let's say we play something like rook e1, then we're losing. Because after d5, our bishop's under attack, and bishop c5 is threatened. So if we take this, then bishop c5, and we lose our queen. Also, if we were to take on a7, then this still happens. Because our bishop's under attack, and bishop c5, with a fork and a check, obviously, is threatened. So we go king h1, just getting out of the way. b6. I thought d5 probably should still be played, and the computer agrees. After like knight d5, bishop d5, the c2 pawn falls, and we get a bit of a game, right? There's like rook f2, rook f2, rook f1. If the queen moves, oh no, then you just lose the queen. You have to go king h8, and things look like they get very complicated here. Like rook c1, king h2, give a check here. Well, then we have e5. Very interesting position. My opponent chooses b6, and I felt like this was a little bit lackluster. I wasn't really trying to take a7 anyway. Bishop b3 is the best move, so I'm happy I saw that. Happy I saw that. Knight h5, again, a good idea to go after the g3 square. The computer actually likes the move rook f3, but I didn't like bishop to f6. Oh, there's what? Queen f2, bishop c3, pawn c3, if rook c3. Oh, then we got our queen behind the rook, and then we take. That makes a lot of sense. I went queen e3, though. This is fine, but it's not the best. Bishop h4, we go rook f3. Now is the time to lift the rook. Queen g5, and yeah, the queen trade is definitely the best move by far, because the g3 threat is eliminated. And if we play a move like rook af1, there is knight to g3 check for a start. But let's say, I don't know, king h2, stopping this. Then after takes, I mean, I don't know, bishop f6. Our opponent's okay, because we need the rooks active. The rook on e3 is completely misplaced. So we take on g5, bishop g5. Rook to f5 doesn't work because of knight g3 check. We go rook a to f1. Knight b5 was preferred by the computer. Bishop f6. g4 is an inaccuracy because I completely missed bishop c3 and then knight f6. Better was knight e2. And if bishop takes b2, we just win the f7 pawn, which makes a whole lot of sense. g4 allows this, and knight f6. But we're still winning after g5. Our opponent should have gone knight h5, because then if we take on f7, there's knight to g3 ideas. g6 is a move. What? Why? Why is this a move? What's the difference with this now? Okay. I don't know why you have to throw g6 in, though. Couldn't you just do this immediately? Wait, what am I missing? g6 takes, rook takes, here. If here, there's rook f4 check. Oh, and if the king moves, you're mated. That's the difference. Okay, I'm never seeing that. More realistically, if knight to h5, I'd probably play a move like king g2, just stopping the knight from infiltrating. And my opponent can defend for the moment, but it's going to get bad. Like, this knight has nowhere to go. I'm probably going to play a move like c4 to lock the c file, and it's not at all clear how black is going to break out of this position. There's even bishop e6 here, because you can't take because the rook hangs. Only white can move. Black is almost in zugzwang. So knight d7 is played. We play bishop f7, king h8, and bishop to e6. Now, I actually missed the fact that after rook f3, I was thinking, well, rook d8, and then just, you know, take, and mate, and game over. I missed the move knight to e5, which is a good idea. The computer preferred the move d4, I assume taking away the e5 square, which is very sophisticated. But okay, we trade off into this endgame. We go rook f5. The rook to any square on the f-file was fine, to be fair. Rook d8, d4, knight g6, rook f7, e5. These are all good moves. Rook b7, knight f4, bishop g4. I think I explained these fine in the game, and the computer thinks that both of us are playing pretty much the best moves. Rook b6, h5, bishop f5, knight e2. By playing h5, my opponent gets access to the e2 square, but we can just play rook c6, which is actually an inaccuracy. Because of rook g8, I think he might be threatening some kind of perpetual here. I think that's the idea. And if we have a step to the g file, then he can take the bishop with discovered check. So you have to get the bishop out of the way, or put the king on h2. But if you put the king on h2, then your opponent can just set up these ideas anyway. There is rook c8. Rook c8 was in the back of my mind in a lot of these lines, which is part of the reason I put the rook on c6. So, and if this, then of course we just trade down, and this king and pawn endgame is completely winning, particularly because we get to the f pawn in time. But okay, my opponent goes knight g3, king g2, rook g8, we have to get out of the way. Of course, taking here loses the game on the spot, which is pretty hilarious. But yeah, we just move our king, take, rook g5, king f4, rook g2. Rook takes c6 is the best move. I think we probably misplayed this endgame a little bit, but it's very difficult to misplay an endgame like this. Of course, we found a way to. We gave this pawn up, went d7. And I mean, the whole point was that the king would have to go to e7 to stop the promotion, and I'd take the rook. Here, for some reason, I completely missed that promotion came with mate, so I instead went king c5, which just prolonged, it just prolonged the game for no reason. And I suppose we did find the winning setup regardless. My opponent gave us the a-pawn, we trapped the rook. The game is over. Black, of course, can never take this pawn because, I mean, how are you planning to stop these pawns? At the most basic level, I can just play king b7 and throw the a-pawn down the board. But, yeah, my opponent resigns in this position, and a pretty successful Vienna game. Hopefully you guys can use some of the ideas I gave in this video in your own games. If you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, the playlist will appear up here. And if you want to see a really cool Vienna Gambit game, then check out the video down there. Thank you very much for watching.